So I notice we've got a number of folks sitting in the back of the room. Please, there's plenty of seats available. Feel free to get comfortable. We've got a second half of our presentation coming up here in just a second with UDT. And so with that, let me transition over. So, I love the vision that and the strategy that Mesa has taken of incorporating wireless display into their classrooms and to making it a cornerstone technology which they're building upon. And while Mesa is certainly a visionary and leader in the state of Arizona, they're not the only school district with this vision and this strategy. We've actually got a number of school districts across the country that have adopted this vision, this strategy, who have taken wireless display technology and put it into their own classrooms for many of the same reasons that you heard from Mesa. And so it's really, really exciting because what we're seeing is this is rapidly becoming a must-have technology in the modern classroom. Teachers want to be untethered. It facilitates such a powerful learning experience because the teacher can get out amongst the students, work with them individually. Everybody can still follow along. And so it really does start to shift how teachers and students are engaging in the classroom. And so what I'd like to do now is invite up DanielnRodriguez. DanielnRodriguez is the CTO of United Data Technologies. They are a large technology service provider here in the state of Florida. And Danny is in charge of, his team is in charge of working with customers to help them avoid risks, avoid the challenges, reduce the cost of implementing new technologies, like wireless display. And so with that, I'd like to hand it over to Danny so he can share some more about some of the school districts that they've been working with here in the state of Florida, as well as some other customers that have been deploying this wireless display technology.
Great. Thank you, Jay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is DanielnRodriguez. I am the Chief Technology Officer at United Data Technologies. Welcome to Orlando. Welcome to FETC. I wish you all a great conference. This is probably my 7th or 8th FETC now. It continues to get bigger and better every year, so we're excited about all of the opportunities this year. I love hearing stories like Nathan's and the diligence, the thoughtfulness, and the process that districts go through as they evaluate technologies. As Jay had mentioned, our organization, we're a solution provider, right? So we support the business of education. We support the transformative nature of teaching and learning in the classroom. And we have partners and vendors come to us all the time, given the size and the scope of our education business, wanting to introduce us to new products and new technologies all the time. And in many cases, some of the early questions we ask is, will this introduce a distraction in the classroom? Will this create something that teachers will quickly have to become technical support resources? Will they have to restart these things? Will they have to begin to understand how to use this as opposed to it really being transparent to the teaching and learning process and really creating new pedagogical opportunities? And so I always like to talk a bit about what our role is. Our role as a solution provider is clearly to help architect the solution. We work very, very closely with our school district customers and partners to ensure we understand what the entirety of the solution needs to look like. And that begins with the strategy. And so as I mentioned, when we have partners and vendors that bring products to us, we have to understand how does it support the overall strategy, the sustainability of that type of kind of new teaching and learning strategy for large school districts. And to put it into a bit of perspective, some of our largest clients are the folks down south, Miami-Dade County Public Schools. This year we've deployed just over 100,000 devices into approximately 17,000 to 18,000 classrooms across 400 locations. And part and parcel with that is the deployment of the wireless display technology and part of Action Tech. So Mesa is a very large district. We work with very large clients, and we have to ensure that once we deploy something, especially into 17,000 classrooms, that we don't have to go back out and touch 17,000 devices once they've been deployed. Now, we haven't deployed that many Action Techs to date. We're right around 1,500 to just around 2,000 fully deployed across the district for many varying reasons. Professional development and training, and obviously dovetailing into the overall district's deployment plans. We're doing a very similar project out in Hillsborough County Public Schools, just on the west coast here of Florida. They're right around 280,000 students, just under 300,000 students, very large school district. But then we also work very innovatively within private education as well. And what we found is that as we've architected the solution, And we really begin to look at defining personalized learning. In many cases, we look to create these untethered, unwired solutions. And as it was mentioned, Intel is really leading the charge in this space. They're focusing on technologies that help us cut the cords. And I'm happy to announce we have one cord left that we're in the process of looking to kind of cut the cord, if you will, and that's power. And we're very, very close with wireless charging to where essentially you won't have to plug anything into these devices anymore to be able to take access to all the peripherals and resources that are built around these devices. In addition to that, we believe our experience is born out of the work in architecting these types of solutions, and our end goal is to ultimately help support this concept of reimagining teaching and learning. And so part of that really begins with the process. And so as I mentioned, we have our partners, they bring us technologies and products all the time, and we have to identify how we can move that through this iterative process of how do we integrate it, how do we support it, how do we ensure that it's sustainable, can we effectively train a very large teaching and learning force around this new sets of technology, and how does that work within the vision, how do we enable training, how do we deliver this in a sustainable fashion, and ultimately, how do we measure its effectiveness? We think it's a great idea, right? And many of us that subscribe to, beginning to take teaching and learning and drive more project-based learning in the classroom, having groups of students work on problems. In many cases, access to resources isn't just a teacher problem, it's a student problem, right? We have a group of students working in one section of the classroom on a particular problem, and wouldn't it be great if I could now ask that group to just connect to a shared projector and begin to display their work, and then take control back from that group and hand it off to another group, all without having to have anyone get up from their seat, move to the front of the classroom, try to find a dongle to connect their personal device or a district-owned device into a set of shared devices so that we can continue to work along in that particular assignment. And so it's really this transformative power of these tools that really begin to define what's possible in the classroom. And so though we are continued and committed to supporting teacher-centric learning models, we do believe that in many cases there are some very innovative strategies which are continuing to redefine transformation in the classroom. Clearly this work is incredibly important. When we talk about engaging students in the classroom, it's more than just keeping their attention, it's helping them identify the things that interest them. It's important that we identify the types of workflows that are necessary to help support that creative learning experience. And the outcomes that we measure from that, right, are pretty clear and evident. We continue to see that student participation, even with the tens of millions, if not billions of dollars that we've spent as an industry in education, that the student participation rate in the classroom is continuing to decline. And we can't seem to put a finger on why that is, right? So we look at technologies like Action Tech to continue to drive engagement, to turn down the noise, turn off the distractions in the classroom, so once we have students engaged, we keep them engaged. So these technologies have to be reliable. We look at the dropout rates, and again, with all the work and all the investment and all the innovation that's happening, we're continuing to see the dropout rate hold somewhere right around nationally at around 27 to 28%. And so with all that we've done, we're holding the fort, but we need to make better progress in this. And so wouldn't it be great if we could measure, in a very demonstrable fashion, how these technologies are affecting these broader outcomes? And when we talk about a strategy, that's where this ultimately begins to support the outcomes that these strategies are necessary. Action Tech is not just a player in the classroom, by the way. They're in boardrooms and meeting rooms and collaborative spaces, work environments all across the globe. And so when we talk about developing 21st century skills so that we have a college-ready, career-ready workforce, that 80% of these new jobs that are being created today, we're going to demand these new types of technology skills, that it certainly makes a lot of sense that the technologies they use in the classroom, that when they move into that first meeting room or into that boardroom, it's something that they're familiar with, something that they can touch and feel, and that they're very comfortable with using. And so ultimately, we see a significant opportunity as we take this opportunity to create lifelong learners, and that these skills that they're learning can transcend into the classroom. As I mentioned, I love to hear stories like Nathan's because, again, very pragmatic, very thoughtful process on how they make decisions around technology and mobile devices is clearly powering everything that we're doing from a learning in the classroom today. Whether that be a laptop, whether that be a tablet, a two-in-one, a convertible, I think one of the lessons we learned is that there is no silver bullet in this space. There isn't one piece of technology across every curriculum area, across every grade band that is the right device. That it's a set of devices, it's a collection of devices. And so platform is probably the single most important decision that most of our clients make. And as part of that platform decision, we have to ensure that these types of technologies that integrate and support that are pervasive across that ecosystem, that are pervasive across the platform. And so, clearly technology has unleashed this personalized learning and expanded opportunities for teachers and students, and we believe that the power of Action Tech enables that. That we've moved away from having to make these significant investments in the plumbing, if you will, the cabling behind the walls that connect into the projectors, the automation systems in the classroom to switch between inputs. All of that created distraction and pulled away from very precious teaching and learning time, let alone when it wasn't working. Then that could sidetrack a teacher and their lesson plan and their pacing guides significantly. Just losing those minutes has, in many cases, a dramatic effect. And so when we focus on mobility and mobile technologies, it's important to understand that when we make a platform decision, and that's how we evaluate and look at technologies like Action Tech, it wasn't just a dongle, something we would connect to the projector that would enable wireless display. We kind of saw that as the ante. The big bet had to really be, is this a platform? Is this something that we can begin to deliver next generation services in and around? And beyond just centralized management, can we create unique and collaborative learning experiences using this piece of technology? Is it additive, or is it ultimately distracting away from the entirety of the overall solution? And so when we look at kind of whether we knew it or not, once we began to introduce technology in the classroom and we began to transform teaching and learning and transform these kind of core learning skill sets, we introduced new skills. We introduced new requirements. When we talk about the process of research, it wasn't that long ago, but I've lost a little hair and I'm wearing glasses these days, so it was a little while ago, that if I had a research project, I went to my local library, I pulled a few books off the shelf, and I had to write a research paper for an assignment that was due. Today, my daughters, they go through a very different process when they're working on a research project, right? They have infinite access to all kinds of information, whether it's appropriate or not, whether it's aligned or not, whether it's meeting certain standards or not, to ultimately meet that same type of requirement. And so when we look at things like content creation and content consumption, the ability to do that wirelessly is incredibly important. But when we talk about developing the skills of collaboration, collaborative problem solving, that technologies need to enable that. And that's clearly one of the things that we see from a platform perspective that Action Tech gave us. Ultimately, we believe that when we look at the outcomes and the research that's being driven around these new collaborative and project-based learning models, these flipped classrooms, we think that ultimately when we begin to capture the types of metrics that are necessary off of these devices, when was it used, how was it used, how many connections were in place, how many simultaneous connections. There's some little known features around these products that are just beginning to get utilized today in the classroom, such as managed meetings. So when you kind of graduate from the standard Miracast standard and you get into the more advanced devices that are using the true WiDi protocol, you begin to enable simultaneous connections for students to a single Action Tech, and then coordinate the process of who's in control and who's sharing, and do that very quickly through a process called managed meetings. In addition to that, you also have the ability to use something that's called a USB back channel. So many of our classrooms, we made significant investments in interactive technologies like interactive whiteboards. And the one cable, as we're continuing to go through the process of cutting these cables, the one cable that continues to exist from our interactive whiteboard is a USB connection into the teacher's device. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. Well, with your Action Tech today, you can take that USB cable from the interactive whiteboard, plug it into the Action Tech, and now have wireless USB and wireless display. So I have all of the interactivity that my interactive whiteboard drives. So when I am now executing a teacher-driven modality, right? It's teacher-driven, it's lecture-driven, all eyes to the front of the classroom. We're working on a project, I'm transferring some knowledge, and then in a moment we're gonna break off into groups and solve some problems. I have the full function and full access of all of the interactivity through my flip charts, through my interactive whiteboard software and my interactive whiteboard, all wirelessly, while I continue to maintain control. Now I can disconnect, hand off to the next group as we're working and beginning to solve some problems. So when we begin to look at the outcomes that are being driven out of this, we think it becomes incredibly important. As we evaluate these platforms as well, there's really kind of three key things that we see that are driving the industry in this space. We talked a bit about mobility. Clearly new standards in teaching and learning, whether there be federal or state standards, that are continuing to drive higher levels of assessment in the classroom, which means we have fewer amount of minutes in the classroom around actual teaching and learning and engagement, right? So if those minutes are becoming fewer and far in between and more precious, we have to ensure that we can deliver this in the most efficient, but most importantly in the most engaging fashion possible. And we believe that wireless and wireless connectivity is one of those underpinning technologies to support that. In addition to that, this device in and of itself delivers a tremendous amount of analytics and has the potential to deliver, from a platform perspective, significant amount of analytics. when was it connected to, who connected to it, how long were they connected to that device. From a management perspective, how these devices are being used in the classroom so that we can begin to correlate data that's delivered from a platform device like an Action Tech across teaching and learning data, from assessment data, from classroom data, from learning management systems, from student information systems. So we can begin to correlate what is the actual student achievement when we enable technologies like wireless in the classroom as opposed to just introducing another piece of technology or another dongle. So analytics becomes incredibly important. We look at through the filter of ensuring that we focus on areas such as next generation curriculum. So how effective is this curriculum? We talked about manipulatives earlier on. How effective is this curriculum when we talk about collaborative learning environments? We focus on the pedagogy, right? So the teacher's style in the classroom, how they operate in the classroom, their teaching and learning strategies and methodologies, and then looking at transforming that now. Wireless introduces some new opportunities. So how do we support that through professional development? And then lastly, how do we begin to enable assessment and ensure that the skills that are being taught or that are being acquired and they can be replicated. So we talk a bit about curriculum for a moment. I'm going to go ahead and kind of build this out here. It's kind of four unique areas that we focus on from a platform perspective that we enable through these technologies. That it's inquiry-based, it's authentic learning, connects real-world issues with core content. So ensuring that as we're looking at these new types of curriculum packages and these new digital resources, that there's a level of maturity that can be enabled in the classroom. Secondarily, obviously, the focus is helping enable teachers, but we want to make sure that it's tailored to the student's interests and it's paced to the student interests so that it's very engaging and interactive content. And then lastly, really supporting that kind of round-the-clock learning, right? So the ability to connect wirelessly to devices in the classroom, knowing that they now have a device, so when they bring it home, traditionally, many consumer electronics devices today are supporting the ability to connect these types of devices directly to them as well. So something that they do in the classroom, they can execute at home as well, in many cases. And then curriculum that uniquely leverages these new devices and platforms. And that we're not focused on using kind of older, more legacy curriculum. Ultimately, this has to be designed to increase student achievement. We talked a bit about that and the importance of that. Driving the development of these 21st century learning skills. And then ultimately, helping really students begin to explore, become creative. It's interesting when we talk about innovation and innovative technologies, something as simple as this can be considered very innovative for students. I know that when we first started introducing interactive whiteboards in classrooms many, many years ago, all the students wanted to raise their hands. They wanted to be involved. They wanted to run up to the whiteboard and actually be involved in it. And in many cases, students are very quick to want to be able to connect, and they want to be quick to be able to share what they've learned and the things that interest them and what they've learned in this particular lesson. And so it becomes a very powerful engagement tool. And when we talk about innovation in that way, what's innovative to you and me may not necessarily be innovative to young learners in the classroom. For me, this is still pretty exciting, something that's thin and light that I can carry around and I can get all-day battery life. For my kids and many kids in the classroom, they don't know a world without something like this. So what we consider engaging and innovative and exciting, in many cases, doesn't really translate to young learners today. And so when we look at the tools and technologies we're using in the classroom, we have to make sure that we're looking at through the filter of how engaging is this? Is this something that is interesting to them, less so to me? But is it really interesting to them, and how can they use that to do something different, something unique, and something creative? When we talk about enabling teachers in the classroom, we've all been on this journey across education, right? That we're trying to enable these problem solving, these collaborative learning environments, these project-based learning environments, where teachers become more of a facilitator in the classroom, and there's probably isn't a single technology beyond the mobile products themselves that enable that as much as wireless display. I think Nathan gave a great example of the ability to use this in place of a traditional document camera. The ability to really take any particular object in the classroom. We're doing a lot of work right now in the 3D space. So we're working quite a bit with the folks like at MakerBot and using products to create these objects that are teaching and learning objects. And the ability to take some very maybe not so exciting subjects and topics and create some unique tools in 3D. Distribute those in the classroom so I can engage students, right? There's one thing to talk about when we're learning about Mayan temples, and I kind of say, hey, everyone turn to your page 172 and we're going to learn about Chichen Itza in Mexico. Or if I were to walk around the classroom and hand out about half a dozen or so little miniature models of Chichen Itza, right? And so I hand that object over to a student, then I quickly now take my device and I convert that to a document camera and say, let's look at some of the intricate details of what the Mayans did when they developed and they built these structures. And so now I'm beginning to take and I'm empowering these students to become part of the learning process. And that one student that's holding that physical manipulative can now turn around to his peers in the classroom and share that with them, all the while I'm maintaining this literacy control in the classroom. So the ability to now take these new technologies and then embrace that with some of these very enabling technologies is becoming very powerful. So we talk about becoming mentors and enablers in the classroom, differentiated instruction and focusing on this individualized and personalized learning that we can with these new types of objects and technologies, and all the while focusing on creating these really collaborative learning environments as we discussed. Lastly, to talk a bit about analytics, and I touched on this earlier on, we're looking to instrument and capture data off of everything. And when we talk about analytics, in some cases, it's kind of the third rail conversation, if you will, in education, right? When you start talking about analytics, immediately teachers begin to think about it in terms of, hey, you're measuring my performance in the classroom, and there's so many very unique and wildly divisive conversations that happen around managing performance. But when we refer to analytics, it's actually quite departed, if you will, or separated from the conversation around teacher performance. It's really focused on classroom performance. And more specifically, how are these tools truly moving the needle? How are they making a difference? Are they creating a more engaged student? Is it giving me an opportunity to enable and use next generation teaching and learning tools and technologies in the classroom? Based upon the students that are in my classroom and as they're using these technologies, how effective are they? How effective is the content? What's the pace of my learners across these new tools and technologies in the classroom? When the technology stops working, how long was it not working for? And what was its impact in the classroom? So when we look at analytics, it begins to take the shape of some very powerful visualization tools that connects to all of these elements of teaching and learning in the classroom and gives us some great opportunities to correlate its impact. I think we're all focused on the same goal, and that is whether we're the solution provider, whether you're the technology provider, whether you're the teacher in the classroom, we're all invested in building lifelong learners, focused on developing college-ready and career-ready kids that will capture the opportunity for the next generation jobs that are being created. And clearly, when you begin to look at the analyst community and what they're saying, that roughly 70 to 80% of new jobs by 2020 will require a significant amount of technology proficiency. Not just a small amount, not just familiarity with the Microsoft Office suite, not just the ability to be able to navigate an operating system, but significant technical skills will be required across 70 to 80% of the job landscape. And so we're focused on developing these curious, constant, lifelong learners, always focused on achieving, always focused on learning, always engaged, how to use technology in a way that's really meaningful and differentiated. And as I mentioned, and again, as I can't highlight enough how much I enjoy conversations that I hear from folks like Nathan across school districts today, the processes that they go through to evaluate the importance of making these types of technology decisions. We've developed a roadmap ourselves so we can help clients through this process. And it starts with infrastructure, right? So when we look at this type of technology, it's one of the very foundational cornerstone conversations that we're having. What do you have today? How do we transform it to enable the future? Building upon that, robust and digital content, targeted professional development, managed deployment for the devices and the resources and the technologies that are necessary, focusing on security and privacy to protect students and teachers, and then lastly, cost-effective planning for future growth and sustainability really defines the strategy. So you heard a bit about, from someone who's actually doing it in the classrooms with Nathan and the amazing things that they're doing in Mesa, from a solution provider who's integrating this into a much broader strategy for supporting transformative teaching and learning. And again, my name is DanielnRodriguez. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at United Data Technologies, and it's been an honor to have the opportunity to share with you a bit around our story and the importance that we see in our relationship with Action Tech. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel.